Hello, welcome. Hi, all. Hi, Jason, Julian. Hi, welcome. I'm just going to give it a minute or so to let everyone join, and then we will get started. If you guys can give me 1 second here, I will be right back. All right, welcome all. Let's see, we got 5 folks in the call. Might be some more joining, but let's get started. I will start sharing my screen. So my name is Rachel Leidy. You may have met me in the first training. I probably was the one to do it. Rachel Leidy, Director of Compliance Education here at FutureFeed, and I do most of the training sessions. This session is end user training session number 2. Okay, so in the first training session, I would have covered dashboard, start, people, tools, documents, and stopped there. And then in this session, we're going to just go over the assess page, talk about documenting assessment results or creating POA&Ms in FutureFeed. Then we're going to review the SSP area, the different SSP reports, and then go on to review your system POA&M and some other deliverables. And so I'm just going to get started. If anybody on the call has any questions related to something that was covered in the first session, I'm happy to address those questions. So just, feel free to shout or type it up in the chat if you have any questions. Just let me know. Interrupt me if you want. I will not get upset. I'm only on one screen though, so I cannot see, the chat. If someone types up a question, I'll look in the chat every once in a while. All right. And this is not a beer. This is a liquid death water. Liquid death tea water is what it's called. But I was drinking it on a meeting the other day and someone was giving me a look and I was like, this probably looks like a beer can. All right, so assess. Okay, let's talk about what you do in this area of FutureFeed, this subway stop of FutureFeed. So this is the area that lists out all of the requirements for whatever framework you are subscribed to and have selected. Okay, so this training subscription environment that I'm in, I'm subscribed to, a level 1, level 2, 171 Rev 3, and 853. So just know, like, if your company has multiple frameworks, we are adding frameworks into FutureFeed right now. We're actively implementing ISO 27001, I think, and some others. And so every once in a while, just check in with us if you're curious to know what frameworks we have put into the system. But just select the one you're in. So here's if you're in a level 1 environment, here I'm just going to see the 17 controls, the 17 requirements that are applicable to a level 1 environment. All right, so I'm just going to I'll stay in level 2 the whole time. But it lists out the requirements and status. You have filtering and searching capability. Keep some status history over here when objective statement status changes. You can see that history. All right, so hopefully at some point when you log into FutureFeed, all of these are green for you. That's the goal, is to get everything 100% green, compliant, right? If you first, if you've not filled out any of this data, then everything for you is just going to be in this unknown state, not assessed blue. I'm going to use the 318 control because I think this is the one that I have most filled out. All right, so every one of the requirements, they're going to have these 6 sections here. We have this requirement satisfaction summary section. That's where you're going to provide details on the requirement, details on how the requirement is implemented and implementation status details. And in FutureFeed, we are working at the objective level, which is really important, okay? In an assessment, for those of you that may not know, but during a CMMC assessment, if you fail one objective, you do fail the overall control requirement. So in general, when you are working on implementing the requirements, or even when you're assessing the requirements during your annual internal assessments, do so at the objective level. Okay. Now there's a couple exceptions to that. I think there's 2 requirements where you can get partial credit, meaning if you do fail fail an objective, you still get some points for what you did pass. But in general, out of 110 requirements, 108 of them, if you fail an objective, you will fail the overall requirement. So it's important to track status and implementation details at the objective level. And test at the objective level too, which is why in the assess, we're at the objective level. So down at the objective level, you can define status, met, not met, unknown, not applicable. You can create POA&M entries for the objectives, and you have a place to define how that objective is implemented in this objective statement. And you have a place to identify inheritance. Okay. We will come back to this section here in a second. So that's the requirement satisfaction summary section. Then you have this interview section. Okay. The next 3 sections actually are the titles: interview, examine, and test. These are assessment methods. Okay. Any C3PAO assessor, any CCA or CCP assessor, they are taught that when they assess your environment for 800-171 compliance, they have to use these 3 methods: interview, examine, test. So first off, they're going to interview you on every requirement. I would bet on that. So every requirement, when I'm a lead CCA, I do assessments. When I interview. We talk about every requirement. We review all 110 requirements listed in the system security plan, and we talk about them. So under interview here, this is where you're identifying, using the RACI model, anybody who's responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed for this one requirement. And now potentially anybody found in this interview section, anybody assigned to a responsible, accountable, consultant, informed, could potentially be interviewed during any of your internal or external assessments. Remember, most of you are probably setting up FutureFeed and working on these requirements to prepare for a CMMC assessment. External CMMC assessment, like a C3PAO certification assessment. But do know that you're going to have to assess yourselves annually. There is a requirement in the CA family, CA 312.1, to annually, when you see the word periodically, just replace it with the word annually. So at the very least, annually assess your security controls to determine if they're still effective and implemented, right? So not only are you going to have to do a C3PAO assessment every 3 years, but in between those 3 years, you'll be doing annual internal assessments. And if something fails, you'll create a POAM for it, so that way it can get remediated and back to that compliant state. And there's this whole like continuous monitoring process. So all I'm trying to get at is this is a lot of data. Okay. It is a lot of data to sit here and fill out all these fields, like to fill out this interview section and this requirement section, and then go and start tagging and identifying all your evidence. It's a lot to initially build out, but it cuts down so much time in the long run because these are not, I'm sure you've heard this. Once you implement the requirements, you don't just implement, it's not a point in time. You have to keep them implemented. You have to remain compliant. And so it is a lot of effort to get this all documented and to really stand up and develop out your compliance management project and program. But if you have all this information filled out, when you move into an internal assessment cycle or move into an an external assessment, your assessment process, that whole assessment time frame is going to be greatly reduced. Because, for example, let's say I'm doing an annual internal assessment. Well, I would log into FutureFeed. I would click on the assess page. I'd start at the top and work my way all the way through all of the requirements. And now I'm specifically just talking about an annual internal assessment, which is a bit different than if you're doing this for the first time, because during an annual internal assessment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this requirements section here, and I'm going to read my summary notes. I'm going to read about the control that I put in place that meets the requirement. Okay, in order for me to annually assess if my controls are still implemented and working as designed and are effective in meeting the requirements, in order for me to do that evaluation, I need to understand the control in the first place. Okay, well, what was put in place? What should be in place? And so when you do any annual assessments, you'll read these summary notes, rely on them. If you're wondering what level of detail to put in this area, put as much detail as needed for either you or someone else in your company to be able to read it a year from now and say, oh yeah, that's what we did. And I remember now that we made that document and that policy, and we have this process that we follow, and we have this form that we use. So you're reading this summary notes to refresh your memory on the security control that was designed and implemented to meet the requirements. That's the very first thing you would do, is understand the control, and then you're going to directly go into assessing if it's implemented. So you're going to want to interview people. And that's why I'm saying, if this is built out, it's built out for you too. I mean, depending on the size of your company, you may not know everybody. And so, if I evaluated this control this year, in a couple years from now, that person may be different, or the team may be different, or someone else is doing the assessment. And so if this is built out, this is going to be really quick. You're going to be able to look down here and see who's responsible and who you need to interview. Then you reach out to them and you ask them questions. You talk to them about the control. You ask them if it's still being followed and implemented, and make sure you grab proof. Whenever you do your internal assessments, I would strongly recommend that part of that assessment process be to collect evidence and put that evidence into FutureFeed here. So now you're going to have evidence that you can show an assessor that you are doing your annual internal security control assessment, but also the evidence that's in FutureFeed, you're maintaining it, because at least once a year, you're kind of deleting out any old data, or maybe don't delete it out, just leave it in there. But every year you're going to collect new evidence and upload it into FutureFeed. And if you establish that process and that make that a requirement, then what that does for you is it essentially makes FutureFeed and your compliance package assessment ready and auditable at all times, because the evidence you have in FutureFeed is always being updated at least once a year. And so you're going to be able to produce some fairly current evidence that requirements are implemented if you need to. If your contracting officer or maybe a prime or even DIBCAC DOD ever call you up and you have to, maybe you're getting like a random spot assessment, or your contracting officer says, hey, give me your system security plan and all your body of evidence, you're going to be able to log into FutureFeed and just go over here to the deliverables section and just export that data and send it over, because it's just all been maintained throughout the year in FutureFeed. And so that's a whole lot to say that, remember, in the assess area, yes, it's a lot of information you're documenting, but not only is this a lot of information being used to populate your system security plan and build out your body of evidence, it's also going to help you reduce the amount of confusion and time spent on managing compliance or completing compliance related activities like annual internal assessments or POA management or continuous monitoring, a lot easier, because it's all just here. FutureFeed is like your security playbook. It is the program your company has implemented to protect that data or those systems. Okay. So a lot of work up front, but it pays off in the long run. Back to that one requirement. So that's what we're doing here. Interview, examine. This is where you're housing your evidence. Okay. So a rule of thumb is, or what I would like to recommend anyway, is in these summary notes right here, or in these statement notes right here, these objective statement notes, when you're defining the control that is implemented, or you're defining, the process that's implemented, then I like to say that anytime when you're typing up this narrative or this description, anytime that you mention a person, role, or a team as being involved, then they should be found down below under the interview section. And anytime you mention a document or a process or a procedure, a form, worksheet, then all of that should be found under the examine section. So all of that documentation that you call out or you speak about, make sure that you have that documentation found under here. You would hit the plus button to connect things. But also, you don't want to have too much connected here. For example, it's probably a really bad example, but I'll just go ahead and do it. Like, let me just do this one here. Okay, so like if I'm looking at this requirement, this is a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts, right? And if I'm looking at the objectives, this first objective says something needs to be defined. So if I look at that objective statement, it says that my company is defining the means of unsuccessful logon attempts in the access control policy. Okay. So as an assessor, as a validator, either internal or external, my next step is I want to look at this access control policy to validate that this required definition is in there. Okay. And so whenever, like I said, if you call out a document, find it down below. So I'll scroll down and I should see under this examine, there's my access control policy. So now if I click it, I should be able to view the document over here, and I'm going to look for that definition. I want to see that that is defined in there. And then I would mark it met or compliant. But okay, why do I have an incident response recovery procedure here? Nothing about 318. Neither of the objectives talk about incident response or anything like that. So like, why is that document connected to this requirement? I don't want that. So not only are you going to make sure you have the appropriate evidence or documentation connected to the requirements, so you could show proof that you are doing what you say you're doing, but you'll also clean up any unnecessary connections. So I would remove this one, because during an assessment, whether it's an internal or an external assessment, to really make my assessment process smooth, if I'm being asked about a login limit, I'm not going to give the assessor my incident response plan. Like, that's just going to delay and make things more crazy. So only give them what you want to give them. Try not to give them more. It will definitely lengthen your assessment time, because they're going to have to, kind of process and filter through all that evidence. But also, if you end up giving them more, what happens is then they start asking questions about maybe some systems that aren't in scope, or some people or teams that aren't in scope, or a whole process that they have no business even questioning. And it can lead to some findings or some, yes. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and just look at the chat real quick to see if anybody's. Let's see. I got someone on the call that I am going to mute. Let's see if I mute this person and that person. Okay, there was 2 individuals that were not muted. I did go ahead and mute you just because I'm getting a little bit of feedback. But just wanted to let you know, if you end up speaking and I'm not responding, it's because I muted you. Okay, so back to FutureFeed. I don't see any questions in the chat. All right, so that's what you're doing here. This is your proof. Examine. I'm going to be examining something that shows me proof. All right. And then under test, so in FutureFeed, we have you log your tools, right? Which you have to do just in general, like good IT management is, managing your IT tools and services. But for FutureFeed, for CMMC, in this tools area, this is also where you're defining your assessment scope. Okay, so in my tools area,
Get that. Could you try again?
gosh, I don't know why my Siri keeps thinking I'm talking to her. Hold on. She keeps responding to me and I'm not even. In this tools and service area, this is where I'm defining the assets that are in my compliance boundary, also referred to as my assessment scope. Okay. For example, I have a firewall in my boundary. I also have, what else do I have? I have server of maybe a database of something here. I thought I would see a database. I don't know. So I'm using Prevail. Here's an application I'm using. It's storing CUI data. So these are all my CUI assets. Of course, these are not categorized correctly. If this is an Active Directory asset right here, that's not a CUI asset. That's a security protection asset. This is just a training environment, so a lot of this data is wrong. But what I'm trying to say is that in this tools area is where you're defining the assets in your environment. CUI assets, security protection assets, specialized assets, all those CMMC asset categories that you've probably heard. This is where you're defining them. And it's important because you need to define your scope, but then also the assets come into play because when it comes to like your technical requirements, like that limit of login attempts, or really just controlling access to your information systems, encryption on information systems, roles, least functionality, all that, that's all on your systems, right? And so you log those systems so you can track the requirements that need to be implemented on them, as well as identify those assets as being involved with implementing or meeting the requirements. And if you're dealing with an assessor who wants to perform a test, they would do so on one of these assets. And so in FutureFeed, in tools, uh, the tools, when you connect them to the requirements, they end up under the test area. So like if I'm an assessor and I want to go, typically one of the tests that I do is, okay, log into Entra ID and show me a listing of all your active users. And then I'll randomly select one and I'll say, okay, go to that user's endpoint and make and show me that this configuration setting, or, that there's a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts applied to that workstation. And so that's why we've housed and decided to identify the technology involved under this test area, because it's usually involved with the testing of um, compliant implementation. All right, then you have this additional artifacts section. So if you want to, this is just where another place where you could house any additional artifacts directly to this one requirement. And then you have the potential assessment consideration. So here, these are just questions that you could, ask yourself or ask someone in your company. These are questions that an assessor could potentially ask. Assessors wrote these questions a long time ago. And so if you're doing if you're evaluating yourself, if you're doing an internal evaluation of the requirements and you're not sure what to look for, what to ask, who to talk to, there's some guidance down here in these potential assessment consideration areas. You don't have to use them, or you can. They're usable. So like this first question, is there a defined threshold for the number of logon attempts? Well, if I'm answering it, then if I say yes and I'm defining the answer, then I'm writing my implementation narrative. See here the implementation details. I'm writing that summary notes or the assessment statement, the objective statement. If I say no, then I'm creating a POA&M. So is there a defined limit of unsuccessful logon attempts? Well, if I say no, then that's a finding because I have to define that. So no, and then if I submit that, now I'm creating a POA&M. See here, it says POA&M description. So I would be creating a POA&M. But you don't have to use these if you don't want to. Some people choose not to. But that's all requirements have these 6 sections, and it's a lot of information, but it's gonna very clearly identify, how the requirement is being implemented in your environment and who's responsible for implementing, some proof, and some systems that they could test implementation on if they wanted to. Um, Now, up here under the requirement satisfaction summary, uh, I want to just show you that, for example, this objective B, right now, there's no POAM items for it. It's in a met state. In FutureFeed, when you mark something not met, it is going to create that first POAM item for you. You see here now there's number 1 there. So I'll close it out. Number 1. So when you're working in the assess area, your goal is to have a status for every requirement, and whether it's met or not met. If it's met, then your goal would be to define, how it's met, how you're compliant, define how it's implemented, and start working on identifying evidence, collecting evidence, or personnel responsible. That's if it's met. If it's not met, then your process should be that you make a POAM entry. And FutureFeed, that makes that really simple for you by just marking something not met, and it's going to create that first POAM entry for you. And then your next step would be to open up that POAM entry and tailor it. Okay. So it is going to come pre-populated with some, you can see here, it's just general guidance on the requirement. But you would tailor this to speak to your company and the issue. So why was there a failure? What was the failure specifically, and what do you need to do? And then identify impact, effort, cost, assign response, assign that poem to someone and set a due date. Okay. And now you just log that on your system poem. And if you want to create 2 poem items, you can. You can create as many poem items as you want for one objective. It really is your preference, okay? And I think it also, the size of your company and the size of your environment also comes into play with maybe how you want to manage your poem. Okay, for example, this objective B is technical. They want to see that the system is configured to limit unsuccessful logon attempts. So they want to see configuration settings or screenshots here. So let's say that I created one poem were not met, and that this first one, I'm gonna give it to my Windows team, Windows admin, implement this within the AD Entra ID environment, right? And I'll assign that to my Windows system admin, okay? And now maybe I want to create a second poem because I have Linux boxes. So, and I have a whole different team, a whole different group of individuals responsible for the Linux boxes. So maybe I'll say the Linux admin, implement this on my Linux rel database and provide me a screenshot. Okay, add. And so now here's my first poem here, up here. This is poem number 1 for my Windows admin, and here's poem number 2 for my Linux admin, and I can assign that one to that other admin. Okay, so now I have 2 poem items because I need to implement this on my Linux and Windows boxes, and I need screenshots and evidence for both. And it's up to you. If you want to create one, and then you could assign just this one poem, you could put them both Linux, Windows and Linux, and then have for the personnel responsible, you can assign multiple people. It's just really honestly your preference and how you want to lay out all that work that needs to be done. But you'll create poems. So in general, when I was doing poem management, we were not allowed, actually, I shouldn't say just poem management, compliance management in general. It's up to you guys how you want to do it, but I will just say that when I was doing consulting and when I was doing assessing for the DoD directly, we did not mark things met or compliant without proof. And I'll just leave it at that. It's your call. If you're like reviewing this one requirement here and you're speaking to your IT department and they say, yeah, that's implemented, maybe that's all it takes for you. And maybe you're going to go in here and mark it met, and you're going to say it's implemented and the IT team does it, and here's how they do it. But Um, Me personally, I always waited to mark things as 100% done or met until I had that proof because often, especially when I was doing consulting, um, often it just wasn't clear. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, we did it. We fixed it." Well, then we run another vulnerability scan report and we still see that the vulnerability is present. Yeah, they fixed it on 3 of the Windows machines, but they forgot to remediate it on this other machine or something, So it can put you in an issue. It can put you in a position where you have something marked as met, but it's truly not implemented because you didn't do any of that internal validation or verification before you marked it met. So that is completely your call, but I would recommend not marking things met until you have that evidence and you have it and you've uploaded it into FutureFeed and you've linked it to the requirement. Or another process, a suggestion is you can have things marked as met. For example, like if I this first objective, which required the definition, maybe I'm going to say it's met. And I'll say it's met because I called up my IT guy, my IT director, and they themselves told me, yeah, they define that in the access control policy. So I'm going to mark it met, so my score is improved. But I'm going to still create a poem item because I don't have that evidence. It's up to you can create a poem item to collect evidence so you don't forget to collect evidence or someone doesn't forget to give you this, approved document. You can create poem items for that. It's your call how you want to manage that. Okay? But um when you're all said and done and everything is 100% compliant and green, what you will have is all 6 of these sections should be filled out, um, and definitely have implementation details describing how the requirement is implemented and track inheritance. So let's go back to that one requirement, the 311.2. Is that the one I was in? The vulnerability scanning. Let's see. Wow. How come? Let me go this way. So 311.2. Um, Inheritance. Don't forget about inheritance. Okay. For example, this objective B. It says vulnerability scans are performed. If I have an external service provider who's doing vulnerability scanning for me, that's what I would call inheritance. And so I just wanted to call out, like, at the objective level, you also have this inheritance icon. So for this objective B, I would either say it's fully inherited or maybe it's partially inherited. But that's what that inheritance is. This icon is depicting essentially it's depicting shared responsibility. Okay. No inheritance means my company is 100% responsible for implementing that requirement in-house. We do that work. Partially inherited means there is an external service provider involved who is helping me meet the requirements, and together both the external service provider and myself, my company, we have a shared responsibility to implement the requirement together as a whole. Or fully inherited means that that objective is being fully implemented by an external service provider. Your company, my company, does not have any responsibility with actually implementing that requirement. But now it's important to know my company is ultimately responsible or accountable. I'm sorry. I'm ultimately accountable. My company is ultimately accountable for implementing NIST 800-171. So if I go into an assessment and I have something marked as fully inherited, this objective B, and during that assessment, the external service provider is there and answering questions and showing proof, but for whatever reason they fail. Maybe the external service provider didn't do something they were supposed to. Maybe they didn't close out, I don't know, they fail, right? That's going to suck. But unfortunately, even though it was an external company who failed, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Ultimately, your company is accountable and responsible for making sure the requirements are implemented. So it's your responsibility to make sure that your external service providers are doing what they are doing what they say they're doing with regards to these requirements, and they're actually meeting the requirements. So during your annual assessment or your annual continuous monitoring efforts, don't forget to be monitoring your external service providers to make sure that they're still doing what they need to do with regards to meeting the requirements, and they're meeting them fully. If you have to do vulnerability scans weekly, make sure your external service provider's not skipping a week every once in a while here and there because they're going on vacation. Like that scan needs to be ran. Or maybe you update your definition to say you're going to run vulnerability scans monthly, and so you have a little wiggle room. But that's what the inheritance is. I wanted to cover that. Okay, does anybody have any questions about this assess area in general, how to use it, um, anything about assess before we move on to talking about the system security plan? Okay, so the SSP, this is a browser version of your SSP, and can you guys give me 1 second here? I will be right back. My dog is howling to get inside. 1 second. All right, so okay, so where do we start? All right, you need an SSP. You need to have a system security plan. I'm sure you guys all are aware of that. There's actual requirement to have a system security plan in the CA family or the CA domain. One of these is 3.12.4 is you have to develop, document, annually update your system security plan, which needs to describe your system, boundary, environment. It needs to describe the requirements and how they're implemented and any relationships with any interconnected information systems. So you do have to have an SSP. All right. FutureFeed is helping you produce that SSP and helping you update and maintain that SSP with some background automation. Okay, so whenever in the assess area, if you're like, let's say I'm going into an annual assessment and I assess 318 and there's been a slight change. For example, maybe we don't, I mean, this is a terrible example, but maybe we don't call it the access control policy anymore. And maybe we call it like, um, I don't know, information access control policy or something. Your company changed the name of it or something like that. Um, so that's a change, right? But let's say you're doing your annual assessment and you make this minor change because you still have it defined, you still have an access control policy, but someone just decided to change the name up a little bit, right? So you do have to update your SSP. You do want to update it just to be clear, right? But when you make this update in the assess area, it gets automatically made in my SSP. So that's what's great about FutureFeed is you do have to produce an SSP and it does have to be maintained and periodically reviewed and updated as you use FutureFeed to like manage your compliance efforts, manage POAMs, manage evidence, all those updates and changes that you're making in FutureFeed automatically get applied to your SSP where needed. Okay. And so what this SSP area here, it's just a browser view of your SSP. Um, Once you get all of your data into FutureFeed and you go and export and you run an SSP report, you're gonna be, maybe 100 or more. It's like a lot of information, 50, 60, 70 pages of data, right? So why we made a system security plan browser area in the application is so that way you can easily view your system security plan, navigate the sections of your SSP, and even, navigate the requirements more easily, and click on evidence by just clicking on a couple buttons. And so um at some point in your compliance management efforts, someone is going to have to review and approve the SSP. You can go and generate an SSP over here, generate an SSP report and export that, and then send it to someone for review and approval. Or you could ask them to just log into FutureFeed and do the reviewing and the approving of the different sections of FutureFeed here. Um, and so you can mark things approved, you can mark them reviewed, you can assign the different sections of pages to someone. Maybe under here, under system details, I'm going to assign that to Nate, my IT system owner, because he really understands the system, right? So you can assign different pages. Now, this system details page is been assigned to Nate, but maybe the system description page, it's different. You can assign someone else here, okay? And if you want to edit the data, so it makes it easy to edit the data and notice where you're missing data. So here, for example, system information, if my unique identifier or my system identifier is inaccurate, I just got to click the button. Then it brings me over to where that information is being collected, and I'll update it. And now if I go back to my SSP, it's been updated. So there I can mark it, after I made that change, then I would go mark it, approved or reviewed, updated, final. Um, okay, so that's all. That's really honestly all it is. Just reviewing your system security plan, the information in it, editing that data if it's inaccurate or missing, and then marking it approved. And then you could see here, these sections here are all green and good to go, but it looks like we're missing some information. In this section here, we have a flag. There's some red things missing, and that's what it's capturing over here. But most of this data here and here, even here, all this data is being collected elsewhere. So even if you have to make changes to that data, you're going to end up just like clicking on it and going to make the change elsewhere. But there is a couple of fields in this SSP area that you do have to fill out in here, and you only can fill it out in here. And that's specifically this system details, where it lists out the tools and the services. And then under here, under the system environment, you can see I'm missing my topology diagrams. Let's see, over here under software, I don't currently have my software listing provided. So it's telling me I'm missing it. I'm going to upload it. So I would click on that, and then I would go and add and upload my latest and greatest hardware software listing. Okay. So it will show you where you're missing data. Look at the red and then address that issue. And so then when you're done, you should be able to, with confidence, after you've reviewed all of these sections and filled out the data and approved that data, you should be able to, with confidence, then go over to this deliverables section and run an SSP report from here. And it's going to be a Word document, 50, 60, 70, 100 pages or more. But you know now that that content in that document is accurate because you reviewed it in in FutureFeed. And so you don't have to review it again. You can just export that data and then go and send it to the C3PO or whoever you need to share that SSP with. But that's really the SSP browser area. It's honestly just like an easy way to navigate your SSP and look at that and consume that information and maybe edit it where needed. So after the SSP, the last major area in FutureFeed here is this your FutureFeed system POAM. Not too much to cover here, but I just want to mention that all throughout FutureFeed, you were putting things on your system POAM. Okay, so when you marked an objective as not met, it got entered onto your system POAM. If you marked a document as pending or still in draft, then it's on your system POAM. For example, let me show you. I probably showed you this last session, but just quickly follow along. Here under documents, you have active documents, and then down here you have pending documents. So things that I log down here or I mark are as pending, like if I open up this document, I can mark it as right now it's active, but I can change it to pending and set a due date. So things that are pending mean they're still in development. And when you mark something pending, it's going to be put on your system POAM. Okay, so we were putting objective failures on our POAM. We were putting document discrepancies or issues on our system POAM. And then under the tools, you can do a couple things. Like, let me open up this firewall entry. So in here, I could make this firewall entry itself a POAM item. By right now it's active. And if I turned it pending, then it would be on my system POAM, basically saying, my whole firewall's on there for whatever reason. Maybe I'm working on acquiring a new firewall and planning for that acquisition and development. Or within your technology entries, you can also go over here under this POAM area and create individual POAMs associated with the technology. So for example, here I created a POAM capturing just evidence. I need someone to give me a screenshot, so I created a POAM. But this is a firewall setting, so maybe my firewall's baseline configuration has not been updated, so I need to update the baseline config to the approved. So you can create POAMs for technology. You can link it technology. You can create POAMs for document failures, definitely for requirement failures. And then all throughout FutureFeed, as you're creating these POAMs, this area here called your FutureFeed is where you're going to see all those POAMs in one place. Okay, so this is just all your open or pending and in progress POAMs. Here's all the things I've marked completed over the past years. And then what we've done is we've given you the ability to build out projects. So instead of working on right now, it looks like I have 64 open items. Instead of working on 64 open items, my goal personally would be to try to cut that down and put all those 64 items into 5 or 10 different projects, and then just focus on those 5 or 10 different projects. It's a lot more. It's a lot, um, building out the projects is going to make handling your compliance and your POAM items a lot easier, especially if you're talking tens of 100s of POAM items, right? So in FutureFeed here, let me zoom out quick. So in here, this is just typically what I do, a little trick in FutureFeed. If you log into your environment and you go to the POAM and you click on proposed projects over here, all of these things with just this plus sign, now these are not yet part of a project. So my goal would be to make sure everything is part of a project, just personally my goal. So let's look over here. what do I got over here? I got this one, a policy. I have my acceptable use policy is on my system POAM. There must be, maybe I'm still working on it. So this one, it's not part of a project. I'm going to try to get it one. So I'm going to put it, actually, I'm going to take this one and I'm going to go up here, add to project. And I already have this security documentation project ongoing. And I have some people working on developing out my security documentation. So now I've just added that item, where is it, right here, to my security documentation project as shown here. So my goal personally, what my first thing was, like, I'd click on the pending POAM listing over here and the in progress, and I would identify which ones are not part of a project. Then I would try to get them part of a project so that way I have some people working on those items. And then over here under my project portfolio, now I just have to handle these handful of different individual projects. And if I go and I show you that security documentation project, so in here, I mean, a lot more metadata, a lot of data you can capture for individual projects in here. But if I scroll down, there's my acceptable use policy. That's my one individual POAM item. Here I have how many? What, 8? So right now there's 8 individual POAM items associated with this one project. And then here's all my pending, and then you can even see the completed items that we've closed out as part of this project. So that's pretty much sums up your system, your FutureFeed POAM. I mean, it's just going to list all your POAM items, open and closed, help you develop out projects and put them into groups where you can actually take some action, and then just manage these things and check in on them. And it's up to you. Your company will need to define your POAM management process. For example, when I was doing POAM management, like, it was required that we had to have a status update for every POAM at least once a month. Like, we had to check in on things once a month. We couldn't go a couple months without, like, following up on some of the open items. And so you'll develop your own process for managing system POAMs. But yeah, that's how you'll do it. And then if you want to mark something complete, you just find the green check mark, and then I'm going to mark it complete. You can log details, what was done, what was completed if you want, and then mark it complete. In the POAM area, you can export to CSV or Excel, or over in the deliverables area where you run your SSP report, you can also export your POAM data here. Under deliverables, you can also export all your files and other data. This is where you would want to export all your data before, sending it over to a C3PAO when you have to collect all your body of evidence and zip it and hash it and then send it to them. You'd want to do that here. And then also in this deliverables area, and this is the last thing I'm going to mention, then we'll open up the floor for questions and close out the meeting. But another thing in this deliverables area I just want to point out is this presentation builder. Um, so now that we've covered all of, FutureFeed, and once you get to this point, you've filled out your assess, you have your listing of system POAMs, you have a system security plan, and really you're just in this process of remediating things and working on getting 100% compliant. I'm sure throughout that journey, you're going to have some meetings with management, and telling them, hey, here's where we're at, here's the issues, here's the progress we made, maybe here's our Spurs score. So what FutureFeed's done is we've implemented this cyber readiness presentation and report builder. And so it's very, very easy, in my opinion. You're just gonna, like, set it up, define who's presenting that report or presentation. What's the executive summary? Like, why are you presenting that report or presentation? And then go over here and pick what you want visible in that report. So let's say I'm going to just meet with my CEO, and I want to show him maybe let's see. Let's show them the assessment data. And then also I want to show POAM metrics, number of POAMs open. And then also we just created a new project that we have to get we're going to propose this new project and get it accepted by the CEO. So let's also show him this MFA project that we got to implement. Okay. So you just select the data you want, and then you go up here, hit play to actually present from FutureFeed, or download to download a report. But I'll just show you what it looks like here quick. Um, so now here's my assessment data. Everything, it's a lot of data gets pulled from FutureFeed. Here's my current score, date, my cage code. Here's my score history over time. And then here's my assessment status, the different controls. Then I think I'm reporting on poem anatomy. So here's all my poem items, open, closed, end. Here's the individual poem projects, right? And then here's that one project that I need my CEO to give his blessing on, because we're going to be spending some money and burning some man hours, right? So let's talk about that project, and then all right, that's it. Exit. Either download the report if you need to share it, or save it, or just exit out of the presentation. Okay. So that's FutureFeed. You now have completed FutureFeed end user training session number 1 and number 2. I will have, spoken about the tool to some degree, almost every aspect or every feature. But I do understand I threw a lot at you. It's a lot to learn, especially if you're new to compliance management. It's a lot to learn. So feel free to sign up for as many of these training sessions as you need, especially as you start working in FutureFeed and doing some of this stuff. You might want to sign up for another training. Um, because as you start doing this stuff, you may have some more questions or run into some more issues. And so definitely sign up for as many trainings as you need. Other places to look for answers. You have the Getting Started guide. You have the Help Center, where you can access our knowledge base articles and videos. Scroll down, and we do have a weekly open office hour with me that you can join and ask your questions there, or just email support@futurefeed.co. And our ticket turnaround time is pretty good. So I'm going to stop sharing. Go ahead, Mike. Do you have a question?
Yeah, a couple. Thanks. First one, do you have any training sessions on how you would use the tool after they've assessed successfully? So in other words, how would I use the tool in maintenance mode to track, like, documentation updates, or to give myself, would I have to go in manually and like just set up a bunch of tasks,
Yeah.
is that how there's nothing that we sort of auto generate or set?
No,
Okay.
no, pretty much it's just all reliant on the tasks. So once pass your assessment, um, start building out reoccurring tasks to remind your users of when they have to do something compliance related. And then that task activity log gets captured in FutureFeed. So that's evidence that you could show an assessor, hey, we are doing our weekly vulnerability scan, and here's a whole activity log showing you, all of our tasks and them being closed out every week for the past 3 years.
Right.
Geez,
And
what am I? But I wanted to also add that when you close out a task in FutureFeed, you cannot bypass logging evidence. Um, so not only will FutureFeed show you in the task area, in the evidence area, it's going to show you completed tasks, but then also you'll click on the completed task, and then it will show you that evidence that was uploaded when you close the task. For example, this is a task. If I go to close out this task here, notice I can't just mark it closed. I have to either, attach or upload my evidence, or link to my evidence, or type up some sort of, status report on the activity, but it's not letting me bypass logging evidence. And so I would just wanted to point out that use this tasks to set up things that you need to do throughout the year. weekly vulnerability scans, monthly change control board meetings, quarterly configuration baseline audits, quarterly access control audits, all those things that you have to do throughout the year to remain compliant and to support your control processes. Set up recurring tasks and then get them assigned to people. So those tasks are not going to be forgotten about because you're going to see them in FutureFeed. And then when they close them out, they are forced to log evidence that that task was completed, which you'll also need sometimes during your assessment.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Mhm.
Two other quick ones. Um, do we have, how do we get, can we get trial logins to like play around with this?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Are you a user?
No, I'm with more of a on the MSP side.
Okay. Well, yeah. I can give you access to this sample company environment right here where you can just play. I'll give you like 30 days access. Is that good? Is that what you want?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. It just helps to reinforce stuff when I can actually do it myself. So,
Yeah. Okay. Let me write your name down.
and then the other question was, does FutureFeed allow me to integrate SSO? Like, let's say for my customer, I want to connect to their Entra ID directory, and
Mm-hmm.
so that I can bring the users in from their directory, or do I have to manually type in everybody sort of,
Yeah.
manually?
You do have to. There's no data import capability at this time, unfortunately. So you will, if you're a service provider, what you'll want to do is make it a standard process to, when you onboard a client, ask them for a list of users that they want to have access to their FutureFeed environment, but also users that you just want to define in FutureFeed so you can assign them responsibility using the RACI model, but maybe they don't actually need access to their FutureFeed environment. So you'll just want a list of users, and it should be a list of users that are involved with, you know, managing security compliance or implementing these requirements. And then also for that list of users, identifying of that list of users, which one should have access to the FutureFeed environment. Um, which I would recommend giving anybody who you're going to assign tasks to access to FutureFeed, so that way they can see those tasks being assigned in FutureFeed and they can also log into FutureFeed and close them out.
Yeah. Can
And
I
then
ask
also
you
ask
to,
for a list of assets as well.
right? Can you add to like at least a request for to be added to your roadmap? Set, SSO integration, like with SAML.
Oh yeah, that's been requested quite a bit. Yep.
Okay, all
That's
right.
definitely on the list of future improvements.
Okay,
But
thanks.
now we do allow you to, I mean, there's SSO integration for like accessing FutureFeed. We do have that integration, but now we can't integrate FutureFeed with like Active Directory to pull in like a listing of active accounts or anything. But you can integrate FutureFeed login. You can turn that single sign-on with your local identification and authentication mechanism. Does
Okay.
that does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Well, hope you guys have a great afternoon. Thanks for attending this training session. Reach out if you have any other questions, and I'm sure I'll see you in a future session or two. Okay, bye.